Hello and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Great to have you along today. Jon is with us, and Jon brings with him, again, another great guest. Today, Dan Kleinman is on the show. He's with Safe Libraries. Lots to discuss with all those books and pornographic books and sex books and deviant books and just sick and disgusting books on the way today. You're going to find out the dirty on all of this, and it is dirty, and we're going to find out from the real true facts of this, because we're going to break it down with a couple of videos, some other good information where you as parents are going to be able to help take initiative and action yourselves to straighten this out and get things back on a normal path, which is something I think we all are looking forward to. So with that, bring in Jon today. Jon, great to have you on the show. I know your time is always limited. Great to have you today, though. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Brad. And we're very grateful to have Dan Kleinman on with us. Dan is an expert in really what's going on in libraries, both public libraries as well as school libraries.
Yep.
Without the majority of people knowing it, libraries have become a primary means of grooming kids, meaning mentally and emotionally manipulating them. We're going to have Dan fill us in on what he knows, because what he knows is what every parent should know. Dan, welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, it's a privilege to have you. You are a wealth of knowledge. I say that about many guests that we have, and you in your area of expertise, you certainly are. Let's start by describe for us what is behind you, because that is certainly pertinent or germane to what we're going to be talking about. And that's perfect for what we need to talk about in terms of that which is behind you comes from the New York Post. Describe what is behind you, because I see your picture on the far right-hand side from our visual perspective. Describe for folks what we're looking at.
This is an article by Dana Kennedy in the New York Post, and in it she describes what's going on with librarians and what's happened to them and how they've become a, as it says over here, hotbed of political activism. All right, I'm featured next to, for example, this is me right over here. I'm featured right next to the new head of the president of the American Library Association, who's an avowed Marxist, who bragged about how she's going to bring Marxism to the American Library Association, and that's what she's going to do. So this article is about what is going on in the United States with the librarians and what they're doing to our communities via the children. And most people aren't even aware of this kind of stuff. For example, this book, A Genderqueer, why is this book in libraries? It is filled with completely inappropriate material for children. Right? Authors may write whatever they like, and it can get on a book list if they want, whatever. That's great. But it's what happened was the American Library Association found that book and thought it would be great for kids, even though the author didn't think it was for kids, and they gave it an award. I think 2 awards. Once the American Library Association gives something an award, it's going to spread like wildfire. And that's what happened with Genderqueer. And it's in many schools now, and it shows graphic pictures of things that I'm not even sure if I can say on this broadcast, frankly.
Well, I say, you know what? Parents need to be educated. This is all about unmasking the trans movement and all facets of it. Parents are aware of what's going on in some of the local communities. We've got Drag Queen Story Hour being held in libraries. So because this book is in libraries, school libraries,
yep.
You know what? Let's describe the feel.
Dan, Genderqueer isn't just in the United States. It's also up here in Canada as well, and I can attest to that. These books are circulating all across North America and around the world for that matter. We're seeing these books entertaining our kids. I don't find pornography to be entertaining to somebody who's under the age of, say, 17 or 16, in my opinion. And even that might be too early for some. But ultimately, I don't need a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old learning about this at that age. And that's That's why we're here, is because of that. So the things that need to be said, Dan, need to be said, whether you say them or I say them. They're sick, they're disturbing. They're talking about sucking cock. They're talking about doing things like anal sex, which is sodomy. They're talking about, what they're not talking about is the AIDS epidemic that could come from all of this, taking it in the ass. And that's what needs to be said. And parents need to wake up, because they're talking like this in schools now in Canada and the United States.
Okay. Well, let me add, in addition to what you described, it also has a link to go to kink.com. So you can go to kink.com if you're a little kid reading this book, and you can see all what's going on with BDSM, the boycott. No, I don't know what BDSM is.
Sadomasochism. Sadomasochism.
Right.
So Dan, what you just said is, in this book, that kids have access to in public school libraries, there's a link to, which is now very common in the sexual orientation and gender identity deviant sex ed material that is being presented to kids. These links are given to kids, and this is the ultimate form of grooming. The kids then, in their curiosity, of course, the link is there. They're gonna click on these things, and in this case, you're saying in this book is a link to a kink site, which is bondage and other horrific deviant stuff.
Yes, and in another book, I believe it's called "This Book is Gay," is not only a link to another kink site or Grinder, but actual descriptions of how to take your picture with your cell phone and link up to the Grinder website and go and meet men for nighttime rendezvous.
Grinder, what I've been told, is primarily a male homosexual hookup site.
That's what's for. And This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson gives these people instruction. Well, look, Juno wrote the book. That's fine. It's the librarians who are taking it and presenting it in public libraries for schools and then defending it as proper for children because of the fact that they claim that it's diverse and inclusive.
So that means you have teen boys, you have minors that are getting hold of this book, and they then can link to and are being instructed, being told then how to create a profile on a male.
And the librarians and teachers are defending children's access to this in schools.
So Dan, give the parents an overview, not just how you got into this, because as you told us off camera that you spent a couple of years as a librarian, but tell us how you became concerned and why we should be concerned, because you were also sharing with us that there's an actual push now by the American Library Association to indoctrinate kids, not just sexually, but also from a certain political worldview. So give us an overview of this whole issue of libraries and why people need to be concerned.
Sure. It's kind of in this article that's behind me from the New York Post. But basically, librarians are not the librarians that we used to know them to be. They have great goodwill now because of what we think they are, but that's changed. Now their goal is to indoctrinate and sexualize children. They have even made it so that literacy is no longer the chief goal of the American Library Association. The top goal is now equity, diversity, and inclusion. The top goal of the American Association for School Librarians is equity, diversity, inclusion. They are preparing a guideline, no more than a guideline. They are setting out standards that schools are supposedly supposed to follow, which set up diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means the exact opposite of diversity, equity, inclusion, as you know. So I'm not going to go into that now, but what we have librarians who have seen that they have the power to take control of communities simply by getting into their libraries or their school libraries and setting policy and then saying, well, we're the librarians, we know what we're doing, and we have such great goodwill that you can't really stop us or do anything about it. And they're slipping in these policies that are directly harming children with sexualized material like genderqueer, that's perfectly legal to keep out of the schools under the Supreme Court cases, common sense and community standards, but they just bully everybody into thinking that, no, you can't remove such material because that would violate First Amendment rights, at least in the United States. Could be something different in Canada. So they force you to do things by lying to parents. They lie to parents in multiple different ways. Sometimes they just out and open lie. Sometimes they violate laws in order to get around the law that would help parents to become aware of what's going on. Sometimes they just tell you to do things sneakily. That is an actual word from the American Library Association on guidance on how to push drag queen story hour through public libraries nationwide here in the United States. And if you have this in Canada, it's because of the American Library Association sneakily pushing it into the United States. Now it's all over the United States. Now it's becoming popular. Everybody's doing it everywhere. It completely violates the law of libraries, which state that libraries are for the use and benefit of the public and not for the harm. These things harm children, right? If you're going to a drag queen story hour and you're learning how to become trans and you're getting a $50 off coupon for a breast binder, and you're going to wear that breast binder and you're going to get onto drugs, and they're giving you coupons for drugs at these things, it's just harmful. This is harmful material. They don't have strippers on a pole in libraries. They don't have people telling you how to roll a joint in libraries. They don't have illegal stuff in libraries because libraries are for the use and benefit of the public. But Drag Queen Story Hour harms kids. I know they like to say that it's cute and it's fun, and it's person in a costume, and we see that all the time on Halloween and Christmas and things like that. But it's not what it is. James Lindsay has disclosed how, he's Conceptual James on Twitter, has disclosed how the drag queen people are intentionally trying to push Marxist revolution via drag. That's what James says. I'm not an expert on that. He is. And he shows you paper after paper of these drag queens writing about drag pedagogy, about pushing Marxism into schools via the use of these cute little guys with wigs on. And this is what's going on in the United States right now, is that librarians are promoting this. And there's very little that people have done to stop it. And when they do try to stop it, then the American Library Association kicks into major action. For example, this book over here, Genderqueer, has been removed from a lot of schools in the United States because parents used the Board of Education versus PICO case to get it out. That angered the American Library Association. So they began to collude with other organizations like GLSEN, GLAD, the American Federation of Teachers, other organizations, to create something called Unite Against Book Bans, to ensure that as many children as possible keep this book in their schools. That's what they're doing. So Unite Against Book Bans was created last year because of the success of parents getting that book removed, in order to mislead people and get people to keep that book and to think that they have to keep that book in their schools. Because what librarians say, librarians have really gone radical. As it says right here, they've really gone radical, and they're taking control. And very few people realize it, and very few people stop it.
Yeah, that sets the stage for, and let's kind of take it from the beginning. You've just indicated that librarians have gone radical. Now, when we think of radical, we think of people pushing an ideology. Yet most people, including myself once upon a time, would have thought that, well, if ever there was a quote unquote safe space, meaning just the kids would be protected, we're just going to take the kids to the library so they can get educated, they can study. What you're saying is there has been a move over time, there has been a move, unbeknownst to the public, that libraries have become a target, or were targeted, to where now libraries, we think we're taking kids to the library to learn, but meanwhile the librarian has is now very active. It's not just Dewey Decimal System anymore, but there's something else going on as far as getting certain kinds of books in there. So speak to us about that, and then what parents ultimately can do, because you're a wealth of knowledge as far as some of these cases, and we're going to review some of the material that your site. Matter of fact, let's start with that. Let's start with your site. How can people access the information that you have?
All right. Well, I publish at safelibraries.blogspot.com. And I have a lot of information on there because I've been doing this for almost 25 years. And the information has been getting worse over time because the sexualization of children and the indoctrination has been getting worse over time. Because as they see they can get away with it, they just pile it on more and higher and deeper, and nobody does anything about it. For example, the American Library Association once trained librarians to how to avoid FOIA laws, Freedom of Information Act laws, so that people wouldn't find out what's going on in libraries. And sure enough, just recently, a few months ago, the Texas Library Association had their top leader and an executive board member of the American Library Association's Freedom to Read Foundation guide librarians on how to use their own personal emails and personal devices to have conversations related to work about books being challenged by parents, so that the parents couldn't file a FOIA request and ask for this public information to be made public, because they think by keeping it on their personal email addresses, that'll keep it from being public. This is an example of what librarians will do, anything, illegal even, to keep parents from learning about how they are sexualizing our children. They're not our friends. And it's not everyone, right? There's not every librarian is like this, obviously, but there are enough positions that the other ones, the good ones, are basically afraid of saying anything or taking action or stopping it from happening. So your kid gets sexualized.
So let's say with the issue of drag queen story hour, the average person, it's sort of like, before we know it, there's drag queens in libraries. It seems like it spontaneously happened. Then what you're suggesting is there's been coordination going on to where now there's deviant grooming. There's no other way to put it. Grooming is influence, unduly influencing someone. Grooming is a technical term in sex offender treatment, by the way. So what you're saying is when people see these drag queens that are now, which are guys dressed in women's underwear and drag, when they're coming into schools, that there's a coordination between these sexually deviant men and the libraries.
There's an absolute coordination. And it sometimes goes more than just mere coordination. For example, in the Houston Public Library in Texas, they had, amongst the number of drag queens reading to children, 2 of them were convicted child sex molesters or whatever. They actually were convicted, and they're criminals. They had these people come in and read. Now, the library has a policy that says, when we have people come in to speak with children, they need to be vetted first. But they didn't vet these drag queens. Why? Well, I found out because they felt that it would have been a microaggression to assume that drag queens would have had a record. So they decided not to vet them, not follow their own rules. And they let them in, and the kids are being read to by convicted pedophiles. So this is more than just planning this stuff. This is just out and out enabling it.
And parents need to understand that pedophiles, that child predators, are always testing boundaries and testing parents' awareness and resolve. So we have the libraries on the one hand, they have an agenda to sexualize, and the pedophiles are testing the resolve of the parents, not just at the library, but then in terms of other places in the community, as well as schools. In what other way, Dan, are the libraries being used to sexualize kids? Describe some of these books that are coming in.
Oh my God. There's a book, I think it's called Flamer, and in which you have a boys showering together, and one's down on his knees in front of the other boy's penis. And they're describing things like jerking off into a jar, and the last one who jerks off into the jar has to eat it. Or this stuff is just disgusting to even talk about. But this is what's in schools. And by the way, when parents go and complain about this to school boards and read to the school boards some of the stuff that's in the books, the school boards often don't want to hear it and silence the parent. There was just a case that just came out from a court, and they awarded $100,000 to one of these parents who was silenced by a school board and then told, you may not come to any more school board meetings because she read these books out loud. So where is this coming from? It's coming from librarians. Schools never used to have this stuff before.
One of the things that we've noticed here in Canada is teachers take what's called a PD day. It's personal development, they call it, but it's not personal development in the sense of them actually going shopping or getting their hair and nails done. It's actually a personal development day at the university where they're indoctrinating them in with the new round of verbiage and the new round of lingo. And we just accept it as parents that they're actually, learning about how to do better math or learn how to speak better English or teach another language or an instrument. But that's not the case. These PD days are all geared towards that aspect of their training. And that's exactly this. Look, this isn't just new either. My son brought home one of these books. I think it was the one that's up in the corner there. Is that gender theory or gender queer up in the corner? So that book he brought home, and this was like 5 years ago, guys, 4 years ago. So I scratched my head wondering, if it was that bad then, and we didn't notice, how long has this really been going on for? Because it's not just recent. This isn't something that's brand new. It's being exposed brand new, but this actually goes back a ways.
It's not just us talking about these things. I have evidence of it on my website, where a library professor at a library school said, look, I couldn't take the indoctrination centers anymore and the constant daily indoctrination, so I left my tenured job to become a reference librarian that I love now. Okay. I have another library student who has come to me and revealed that the school is loaded with this kind of stuff. It's not really about librarianship anymore. It's about Marxism via librarianship. And he's going to be writing a piece for me on my blog. This is not just us feeling this way. This is actually happening, actually documented, that these library schools are now about indoctrinating students. And librarians are coming out, selecting these inappropriate books for kids and giving it to them. And this is why this is happening. Didn't used to happen. It's happening now because of these librarians.
I know students are banding together right now as well, where they're actually going into the library, a group of 5 or 10 kids, and they're actually taking out all those books and they're making them disappear.
Yeah, Dan, we're going to begin to look into, based on what you're going to recommend, ultimately what can a parent do?
A parent has to become aware of these problems, has to become even aware that a librarian would even dare to do this stuff, and has to stop assuming that these people are your friends. These are people who are actually trying to indoctrinate your children, but they do it with a smile and a dress on. All right, that's what it is. You have to go and find out whether that school policy has anything to do with the American Library Association. Even the Canadian schools might refer to the American Library Association Bill of Rights. That Bill of Rights is the camel under the nose of the tent, because it contains that word age, that it would be age discrimination to keep kids from anything. Forget the Supreme Court, forget community standards, forget common sense. You cannot keep a book from kids just because of age. It's in that Library Bill of Rights. So if your school or library says that it follows the Library Bill of Rights, it's sexualizing your children. So that's what you need to do as a parent, to fight back, to get that out of your library. And the best way to do that is to take over the library boards and the school boards with yourself and people like yourself. That is the way to create the change. change those boards.
Describe what a library board is, because this is the first time here, right? So even though I'm educated in the transdeception and predators, the average parent probably isn't aware of, okay, where do we start? How can we can either walk up to a librarian with these books saying, aha, we have them. My hunch is if we were to check them out and never return them, they're going to put more of these books in there. They have this unending supply.
Right.
So on the one hand, I can see the benefit of, oops, we have overdue books or we lost the darn book. But if there's a never-ending supply that's going to keep coming in, they're going to keep filling the shelves at night.
And this is why you need the right library board in there. For example, in Gillette, Wyoming, the library board was elected of a conservative nature, although everybody opposes this inappropriate stuff. And they have gotten rid of the American Library Association from all their policies. They don't send any more librarians to the librarian conferences. They don't pay for them to join the American Library Association. Not even the state library associations. They're little local knockoffs of the American libraries. Libraries are created by law, and part of that law says a library is run by the board of directors, and they have the right to choose the head librarian, whatever. And these are the functions of the board of directors. And this is how you vote for them. So there's these laws that they have to follow, and they make these decisions. So if they're going to back a library director who's sexualizing children with Drag Queen Story Hour and genderqueer and this book is gay, then that's what's going to happen in the library. There's nothing you can do to stop it. But if you can get conservative members in there, or people who think that you shouldn't sexualize children, even if they're not conservative, that's when you can change the policies, get rid of the American Library Association influence like the Gillette, Wyoming library did, and start taking back control of these libraries. It would also be helpful if parents all somehow work together. The American Library Association complains about that. They complain when people get help from national groups like Moms for Liberty, Mass Resistance, No Left Turn, Mary in the Library, a bunch of other national groups. The reality is the librarians work together nationwide to help sexualize children. For example, I'm about to expose, to write on my blog about a librarian who said that she was watching her school board meeting when someone complained about a book. I think it was genderqueer. And within a half a minute, she called up the American Library Association, the National Coalition Against Censorship, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, the something else, her gay clubs in the schools, and then used the New Jersey Library, not even a state library association, but the New Jersey Library with state funding to contact people to tell them what was going on and get like a giant crush of people to show up at the meeting and just crush the library board to make them think what things that were just false and to get kids to act a certain ways. This is what the librarians do. They collude with each other behind the scenes that you don't even know about, nationwide. And then they complain when, as a parent, you get help from another organization like that.
So these librarians now have become what amounts to activists.
They train them to be activists. Absolutely.
Okay, Dan, we're coming up to the end of this episode. Would you be willing to stay with us for a continuation of this discussion?
Sure.
Okay, we have a lot to get into. Plus, we have a video that's prepped that's going to be very revealing on the mindset, really, of what the American Library Association is all about.
Yes.
But as far as the library board, how do people find out who's on this library board, and where does the average person look? Because right now, I don't even know. Where do you find this board?
You'd probably go to your school site or your local town library. Just look up the library, and somewhere they'll have a link for the library board. You can find out who's on the board, find out when you have to submit your name to get on, to run for the board, and so on and so forth. That would be where to start. Just use the existing resources that are already there.
And are these board members put to a vote to the public on the ballot?
Now, that depends on how they're selected. They could be appointed, they could be voted for.
If libraries have become now a strategic means of indoctrinating and grooming kids, right, then we need to, as it were, take back these libraries and bring sanity and protective policies. And that is a very practical step that parents can take. That, okay, if I'm a parent, I either can go and remove these books, or I then can assume a position of actual legal and proper influence by getting on the library board. That's a very practical thing to do. Dan, thank you. Dan Kleinman of Safe Libraries. You stay right there. We're going to pick it up at this point at part 2, and we're going to look at a film clip from the president of the American Library Association. Is that what we have queued up?
Yeah, well, she's a director of the Office for Intellectual Freedom and the Freedom to Read Foundation for the American Library Association.
People want to stay tuned because they're going to be very shocked what they're going to hear. Brad, we'll wait with bated breath.
Thanks, guys. Great episode. This first half. Part 2 will be much more to come. Obviously, the sick, disturbing books that are making it into our schools, and all in the name of inclusion and diversity, which is total nonsense. We're going to break it down some more. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. I'm Brad Wilder. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'll see you next time.